This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, a website, or online store, make it with Squarespace. Use the offer code Films&Stuff to get 10% off your first purchase. One interesting find in covering Marvel's films is that even though they're mega-budget spectacles, one wouldn't exactly call them action films. Usually, we define action films as films where the action is the headliner. It's what you're there to see. However, if you've paid any attention to this extensive series, you know then that the reason people keep coming back to Marvel films is that they've created character relationships that audiences deeply connect with. In these films, oftentimes the scenes of characters interacting with each other are far more resonant than their most explosive and expensive scenes. The best Marvel films, then, are usually the ones that interweave the mind-boggling spectacle with the interpersonal relationships, where the action scenes aren't just filler, but crucial for the development of the characters. Nevertheless, even some of Marvel's better films could survive a couple of weak action scenes. I mean, I don't think many people left the first Iron Man raving about the final fight scene. One perfect example of this would be the first Guardians of the Galaxy. This is a film I adore, but not necessarily for its bits of action. Quick test, can you remember a particularly memorable moment of action from Guardians of the Galaxy? I'll give you a moment. Now, I'm not saying the action scenes here are necessarily bad. Far from it. They have good shot continuity and composition, the work done by the stunt performers and visual effects artists are convincing, and the scenes have a fast energy and pace to them. They are, in a word, functional. They get the job done. However, despite all these pros, one can't help but feel that there's a giant disconnect between the action scenes and the rest of the picture. It's as if these scenes were directed by completely different people. Oftentimes, that's actually the case. Marvel has a seasoned second unit team that works on pretty much every single one of their films. Action scenes are hard to do, especially for filmmakers that mainly have experience making television shows or low-budget indies. On Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon wasn't even on set for the major end of Act 2 battle in Seoul.
It's called compartmentalization.
There's nothing wrong with this approach to filmmaking. In fact, this is standard practice for most franchise blockbusters. But when you have the same group of filmmakers working on films with similar plotlines, with literally the same MacGuffins, there tends to be a sameness to the action scenes. They all have the same upbeat music, the same pauses for comedic levity, and there are only so many ways you can stop an Infinity Stone. Marvel has some truly dynamic and thrilling set pieces, but they are the exception, not the norm. Where these action scenes become problematic is when the plot-focused nature of them takes over the oh-so-crucial character relationships. Jumping back to Guardians, one of the elements that is underutilized in the film's action is the relationship between Gamora and Nebula. On paper, the two have a very interesting dynamic that evolves throughout the film. They start out as adopted warrior sisters of the Mad Titan Thanos, and are tasked with aiding the film's antagonist, Ronan the Accuser. After Gamora learns of Ronan's plan to destroy the planet Xandar, she betrays him by keeping the Infinity Stone MacGuffin away from him. Nebula remains allied with Ronan and Thanos, partly from a sense of sibling rivalry, and ultimately, she succeeds in getting the orb back to Ronan. Once Ronan learns that the orb is the Power Stone, Ronan breaks his alliance with Thanos and vows to come after him once he is finished with Xandar. Nebula, in this process, remains loyal to Ronan, revealing her underlying intentions to kill Thanos for making her the way she is. Now that is a lot of emotional baggage from just one relationship. On Gamora's end, she's wrestling with guilt, morality, and a purpose to redefine who she is. Nebula, however, operates from a far more selfish perspective, antagonizing her sister and father seemingly out of spite.
I know you're both crazy.
This is great foundation for some really interesting character drama. So why then is their final battle so boring? Well, there are a few reasons. For one, the location and lighting aren't particularly interesting. Because of the forward momentum of stopping Ronan, they're only shown fighting each other in a montage-like manner for a few seconds at a time. We are only presented with a flurry of swings, blocks, and kicks. The film at this moment is far more concerned with the greater stakes at play, so even though their relationship is filled with interesting conflict, their final confrontation is really only about Gamora opening a door. This right here is the embodiment of the limitations of the Marvel action scene. Now as for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the elements that separates Volume 2 from other Marvel films is that it doesn't have a ticking clock MacGuffin driving the narrative. For most of the film, we follow our characters digging their way into their own messes, forcing them to reflect on their inner demons. By ignoring many of the tropes that define comic book films, Volume 2 can explore these characters in a different light to find new meaning. The best example of this within the film's narrative would be Gamora and Nebula's brutal fight to the death at the film's midpoint. For a quick recap, Gamora is in a frustrated state during her visit on Ego's planet. She is suspicious of Ego and Mantis' behavior and has just had an argument with Peter after he's acted up like a child. She goes out into the fields to contact Rocket and hopefully have a moment of peace. On the other end of the galaxy, Nebula has aided in the Ravager's capture of Yondu and Rocket, and in return, she asks for 10% of their bounty and one of their ships. During this period, she tells the Ravager Kraglin that as a child, Thanos would have Gamora and Nebula fight each other, and whenever she lost, Thanos would replace a part of her body to make her stronger. Her hate for these two has reached its boiling point. Her only goal now is to hunt them down, starting with her sister. The main point of this action scene is Nebula bringing the sins of Gamora's past back to haunt her. The question then is, how does the film dramatize this conflict through the action? One of the tools the scene heavily utilizes is sound, or the lack of it. There are no hit 80s tunes or rousing Tyler Bates fanfare, only the sound of their screams, their weapons, and their reckless destruction. Take a look at this moment right before the fight breaks out. It's a small one, but it matters. While Gamora sits in this open field, these two plants rock back and forth as though they're kissing each other. The sound of them touching is a dominant part of the soundscape. We get an extreme close-up on Gamora to communicate this discomfort. Gamora resolves this by killing the two plants. The use of the wide shot releases the tension. This is how the scene introduces Gamora. She's a warrior, one trained by Thanos. The downside of that is violence is the only way she knows how to deal with her problems. Sound is also how we're introduced to Nebula's ship. Once Gamora hears it, we cut back to this extreme close-up. It starts out quiet, but quickly amplifies like the THX logo. The silence is merely there to be offset by loud noises! Now would be a good point to mention the inspiration for the scene, as the vocabulary of this action scene is heavily borrowed from the crop duster attack in Hitchcock's North by Northwest. One of the ways to avoid the trappings of the superhero action scene is to take inspiration from different and older genres. Besides, North by Northwest didn't have a bloodthirsty cyborg. Alongside having similar setups, the one element this scene borrows the most from the crop duster attack is the subjective camera. Save a couple cutaways to Nebula manically screaming, the camera primarily follows Gamora through this assault. In fact, as this scene evolves, the camera prioritizes the point of view of whichever character is being attacked. The dramatic effect is obvious. The action becomes punishing rather than empowering. The scene also goes through massive shifts in momentum. Gamora will find some cover for a quick moment to breathe, only for Nebula to appear out of nowhere and bring the action back up to 100, all within the same shot. Characters spend more time recovering than fighting. Again, it's senseless, mindless destruction. Now these are all fun and cool techniques, but what's most important is the subtext behind the fight scene. The best comic book films understand that how these characters act during the action scenes informs us more on their characters than any scene of dialogue. Because Gamora and Nebula are fighting for more than just survival or to win. Gamora deals just as much violence to Nebula when she has the upper hand. This scene is about how these two characters deal with trauma.
You were the one who wanted to win, and I just wanted a sister!
These sisters are no stranger to trauma. It is the foundation for their skills as warriors. I mean, Thanos is basically Space Fletcher from Whiplash. All this abuse is a means to his success. Even when they're away from Thanos, these roots inform every action these sisters take. Given the described environment that they grew up in, violence is likely the only means of communication between these sisters. It's their shared language. Nebula traveling across the galaxy to kill Gamora is her cry for help. There's a mountain of difference between this action and this one. This scene is essentially an argument. The conversation that ends the fight merely puts into words what they were already saying with their fists. This is why the scene follows such an erratic progression. The two go from being saved to trying to kill the other on a dime. This emotional territory is messy, to say the least. To me, this is what makes the fight so interesting. It's almost cathartic in its destruction. It's these two characters disposing of all their baggage so they can heal. Every action film, is based around the premise that our characters need to get violent in order to solve their problems. We as audiences crave that moment where the hero gets to let loose and destroy all the baddies. With this premise then, every action film walks a tightrope, from how it portrays the aggressors, to how the heroes get violent, to what the characters do to save the day other than violence. This tightrope is there because violence for the sake of violence is terrible, both in fiction and in the real world. In some ways, this scene is a deconstruction on superhero violence. Without a MacGuffin to drive it, we see how senseless this action can be. Is someone truly a hero if they mainly resort to violence? Of these several devastating moments at the end of Volume 2, the one that really got to me was the final conversation between Nebula and Gamora. Now, it wasn't the words that moved me, it was this. Nebula as a character is so used to violence that when she is touched, her instinct is to attack, an instinct diffused by Gamora's love. In this moment, Nebula refuses Gamora's call to be a guardian and save girls like her around the galaxy because...
I will help them by killing Thanos.
Now that's what she says, but her performance says otherwise. Humans respond far more to physical interaction than the words that we say. In reality, she does this because she hasn't fully healed. Her relationship with Gamora isn't completely mended, and Volume 2 understands that this process takes time. Her violent past still controls her actions, leading her down a failed path to kill her father. Make no mistake, against a titan like Thanos, violence is necessary. That's where the fun is. But to truly win the day, our heroes need to, well, be heroes. Nebula's instinct for violence failed her in Infinity War. Every character's instinct failed them in Infinity War. And with the release of Avengers Endgame, we'll finally get to see if Nebula can evolve through action and finally conquer her demons.
One to go.
How do you send an impactful message on the internet? Do you travel across the galaxy just to beat the snot out of your sister?
Are you kidding me?
I don't think so. Instead, you can use Squarespace. With their award-winning templates, creating a powerful identity online becomes super easy, just as long as you don't go by the name Taserface. Each template is suited to a wide variety of projects, which will come in handy during your galaxy guarding deeds. If you want to set up a new crew, or maybe just change allegiances, Squarespace allows you to set up or transfer your domains. Saving the galaxy may require some help, and if you need it, you can rely on their award-winning 24/7 customer support. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial today, and when you're ready to blast off, head to squarespace.com/filmsandstuff and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.